I want to bring in the former Treasury Secretary Snow into this. And Secretary, we're going to have to, I hope not be interrupted by Sean Spicer when he comes. But if this is true, sir, and it looks like, and I never doubt Charlie Gasparino because he's never wrong, that a tax cut does materialize, but it might not be as big or sweeping as was envisioned. And you could argue, Charlie didn't say this, I did, that the markets have factored that in. Then you could start wondering whether the markets would be disappointed if they don't get something to the degree they thought they would.
Well, the picture's clouded, as you're saying, Neil, but I'm still optimistic we'll see a big tax bill, an important tax bill, and it will contain a lot of reforms. After all, tax reform is the centerpiece of getting the American economy going again after 8 years of subpar performance.
What if it's not that, though, Secretary? What if it is, you know, you'll see tax cuts of some sort, but you will not be able to see the sweeping kind of comprehensive 1986 Ronald Reagan type actions, that it's not going to be that.
Well, then we'll have slower growth, we'll have fewer jobs, we'll have slower wage improvement, we'll have a less successful economy. So it's important to get real tax reform, and I wouldn't give up on it. Talking to people in the Congress... Do you give up on the notion that
it's an August event, sir?
I think the timing is less important than getting it right. In that, I agree with the White House statements. And the experience with the health care reform clearly tells us there needs to be a successful effort to educate both the Congress and the American people, so that the benefits of tax reform are something that the public sees and demands.
All right, Secretary,
we're out of sync with the rest of...
I'm sorry, I still have my friend Charlie Gasparino here because I want to get your sense, the people you talk to in the financial community, if it's to the, you know, the frame that you talked about.
They're ratcheting back all expectations. Now, the markets are still pretty strong, right, comparably, but let's be real clear. Tax reform would be...
And by the way, this might be a lot of Dodd-Frank talk. They're going to roll it back, right?
That would be a good thing.
That's helpful, right?
The markets would like that. But here's the thing. I think you need 60 votes to get tax reform. You cannot do that through... I'm not a parliamentarian, but you run into the same issue with health reform. You know, you can't do the whole enchilada on reconciliation, or you have to do it through reconciliation. If you want 51 votes, you cut taxes. And the other thing I'm hearing from the White House is...
You might be limited to that.
Yes, and here's the other thing. It's going to have one of those 10-year sunsets. It's going to be...
Like Bush's did.
Yes. That's
what do you make of that, Secretary? Now, you know, that's how they had to cobble together the Bush Jr. tax cuts, George W. Bush's tax cuts, because they couldn't, they were working within that framework. If it's that, and there's a 10-year sunset, what do you make of that?
Well, I think that's probably the way we're going to go. Desirable as bipartisan support would be for broad-based tax cuts and reform, I don't think we're going to get it. It doesn't seem to be in the DNA of the Democrats to support lower tax rates. So I think the Republicans are going to have to do this. Be better to have it be bipartisan, but unlikely.
Do you have to pay for them, Secretary? Do you stand in the camp that says live with bigger deficits because you're going to get under dynamic accounting a lot of revenue down the road, but you might have to swallow bigger deficits in the near term, or are you in that revenue neutral immediately bunch?
Well, Neil, we need a fiscal policy framework here. That
good luck getting that.
Yeah, but that's central to this is a fiscal policy framework where we get the growth we need from lower tax rates.
No, I definitely understand what you're saying. I'm not here to besmirch the administration or Congress, but anything approaching fiscal discipline is like, you know, me walking a buffet line. That's dicey. But I do want you to know from your vantage point, one of our more respected Treasury Secretaries, whether you could live with what some conservatives in your party are espousing, tax cuts that will make the deficit worse before they make the deficits better.
I think that's probably what we're facing.
It doesn't worry you. It wouldn't worry you.
Not if we get real reforms, because on a dynamic scoring basis, real reform will give us higher growth, and that'll help pay for some of it. Not all of it, but a good part of it.
Charlie, what do you make of that?
Well, I think he's right. I mean, that's my biases. I believe in lower taxes. I believe in free markets. I will say this, though. We don't know how the administration is really going to approach this, I think, because we don't know who's got the president's ear on this? Is it Steve Bannon, who's obviously been downgraded recently, who's favored, but believe it or not,
What if it's Gary Cohn, a liberal?
Gary Cohn or Jared Kushner, two liberals that are now in ascendancy. You could see a lot less of the tax cut, more of the infrastructure stuff. Gary Cohn was #2 at Goldman Sachs. They've always preached at Goldman Sachs Keynesian fiscal policy of spending and building as a way to get the economy going as opposed to tax
Those
cuts.
Goldman Sachs guys, they like tax cuts, don't they, one way?
They like corporate tax cuts. I'm just telling you.
No, I understand.
The firm has, if you read the firm's literature, they really think that Keynesian infrastructure stuff is good. I mean, they're all their economists.
But you're right. There are no supply-siders that we know of in a prominent role in this administration.
The closest you got, I think, is Bannon, who's not quite a supply side. He just believes in, getting rid of the administrative state, and there's a lot of theory that he gets into. But I think he's the closest thing right now you have to a supply sider inside there, and he's obviously lost on the losing end of that battle with Jared Kushner.
Well, Secretary, that's an interesting argument. I don't remember, back in the early days of President Bush when they were pushing tax cuts, that we were just dealing with a recession that had taken grip. People forget that, but the president's tax cuts at least alleviated that. But there are no, Art Laffer types in this administration that I can see. Does that make a difference in terms of policy, or if the president strongly believes in something, as George W. Bush did then, in tax cuts for everybody, he campaigned on it and delivered on it? Who decides this?
Well, ultimately the president.
Right.
And ultimately this has to be a joint venture, Neil, between the White House, meaning the president, and the Congress. And they have to get on the same page. And the White House has to speak with one voice, and the White House and the Republican leaders have to be on the same page. If they do, they can get this done. They have the votes to get it done if they all get on the same page.
Are you worried, though, given the health care effort, that they're not? They don't have a good track record.
Well, I am concerned about that, of course. Yeah. But I think they've learned something from that health care failure, and that is that the White House ultimately does have to lead. And the White House has to put the pressure on this dissident group, this Freedom Caucus group, that seems to put their own ideology ahead of the party and ahead of the country.
I don't know, though, Secretary. There's such little wiggle room, right? I mean, the numbers are such that it doesn't take more than a couple of people to change everything, right?
Right. They have a majority in the House, but not, such an... Moderates don't... We should point out something about the Freedom Caucus. These are fiscally conservative folks that represent districts that wanted them to do what they did, which was vote against a plan that they thought was Obamacare light. And I will say one other thing. My reporting, it was actually my producer, Brian Schwartz, who spoke with Spicer.
Never give credit to other people.
I know I shouldn't, but
He's a wonderful human
I actually
being.
like this kid.
He's very nice.
But, think about it. If you don't know what's going to be in the tax plan now, that's what Sean Spicer said, then it gives Gary Cohn and Kushner to put their mark on it, which is going to be less supply side. It just ideologically would be less supply side than it would be otherwise. I mean, that to me should say something to our viewers, stockholders. Listen, I think the market likes a 15% corporate tax rate. I think the market will go up if that's what they do. But who knows? I mean, I don't know where these guys are coming out.